Good morning again. Now we will look into the experience of the European Union and how we have been implementing the system. And as I told you this morning, we did it since 30 years, and 30 years is quite a lifetime for an individual. And I believe it was also very important for us when we decided to do this study to analyze what was our impact, what value the system has created for the European economy, on job creation, on the environment, what has been, in a nutshell, the impact of the system over all these years. So we'll give a general outline with general remarks on the study, and then we'll go through the chapters and measuring what we have done in terms of impact on economy and on environment and society, with some final considerations. Okay, so doesn't work. General remarks on the study. It's the big one or the small one? The big one. Okay, the study was conducted in 2022, and we did it in cooperation with the EU IPO, our sister agency in the European Union dealing with intellectual property rights, and specifically with the body within the EU IPO, which is called Observatory on the Infringement of Intellectual Property Rights. We did it in partnership with them, and we made the first time experience in structuring this kind of study for the European Union, where we had to go through a narrow literature review of sources to elaborate the study, adopt a methodology, because we had no methodology before, at least developed in the EU for our system, choose the data, and then provide the results. So we had chosen to go through an impact study that would quantify the impact on economy, and we looked also into the competitiveness of the farmer community in the EU, the job creation, so employment, and also the impact that the system might produce on trade with the rest of the world, so between the European Union as a region and the rest of the world. And also, since, as you know, in the European Union we have been implementing the so-called Green Deal, we wanted to see if and to what extent the system could support the achievement of the key objectives of the Green Deal in terms of preserving biodiversity, the use of land, the use of resources, the use of water, emissions, greenhouse gas emission, and, as I said, the biodiversity loss. So we structured the study through these lines, and it doesn't want to help me, this tool. Okay, the first obstacle, the first challenge we had was, okay, we need sources, we need data, because you cannot elaborate a study without data. And you can imagine that it was a big challenge to go through the available data from reliable, objective sources. And obviously, the first thing we did was to look into our own data. What are our own data? Well, the registry data. So everything we have in the register of registered plant variety rights in our office, in our agency, since the beginning of the system in 1996, until the date of execution of the study. But we also looked into other registries, also registries of non-protected varieties, meaning commercial registries where varieties must be registered for marketing. For example, vegetable, agricultural crops, and fruit trees crops. We also looked into Pluto database, the UPOV Pluto database, OECD variety list, etc. And also other IP rights. We were also looking into trademarks, for instance, European Union trademarks, and other databases. You might know the Euroseeds Pinto databases, which is a very specific database that link patents in plant innovation, so biotechnology patents with plant varieties. And if you consult that database, in fact, you can see what patents can impact varieties that are also protected. Now, we had also to choose the scope of the study in terms of species, in terms of crops, and we could not decide to leave any specific crop outside of the study. But of course, you can imagine the number of species is huge, and we had to make a choice. So we made a selection in agriculture, in fruit, in vegetables, and what we faced with the ornamental was very challenging because the number of species that you can find in the ornamental family, let's say, it's very broad. So we could have no other option than to treat this sector as one combined big crop due to the very large number of varieties that you can find that are protected by plant variety right currently in the system. And the other crops you see listed in the different categories, we made the choice and we could reach more than 80% of the coverage of the total number of protected varieties because these are the most important, the most significant species in which we receive applications for protection of plant varieties. So if you look into vegetables, for instance, you will see that one of the top #1 species is lettuce, where there is a lot of innovation, tomato variety, pepper, melon, bean, etc. And obviously, if you look in agriculture, for instance, you will see on the top of the list wheat, corn, barley, sunflower, sugar beet, potatoes, ryegrass. So this is to share with you that we did the study selecting from within the crops the most important for our system to protect new plant varieties. So when we made the study, we wanted to cover the whole range of our stakeholders. We were counting the applications and the number of applications and the titles as a good indicator. We wanted to include the breeder perspective, the grower perspective in terms of added value for these categories of stakeholders. And we were also wondering to see what was the impact that this produced on the economy in the European Union. So when we studied the methodology with our economists, so there has been a team of economists working behind the scene to produce the study, the methodology that was chosen was, let's say, a contrario negative approach in the sense that we wanted to see, okay, and if we had not had the system in place, what would have been the situation? So we did a kind of negative analysis. So again, if we had not implemented the system, what would have been the outcome today after more than 20 years of implementation? of the system. And we have seen that through this analysis, the advantages of having a system instead of not having it are much higher and visible than a situation where we would not have had the system to implement. So, for instance, if we look into agricultural crops, we would have been, in terms of production, a 6.4% lower production. And I have to tell you that all these data are very cautious, because we didn't want to, in a way, it was our first occasion to study the impact of the system, and we wanted to be rather conservative in order not to, let's say, exaggerate our findings. So the same, you see the figures that appear on the slide for each sector, for the fruits, for the vegetables, and you see a minus 15, which is a very significant number for the ornamental industry as a whole. As I told you, you have to consider the number as a whole and not going, for instance, only into chrysanthemum or phalaenopsis or roses, which are the most important rose sectors where there is improved breeding in the European Union. So the economic contribution was shown to be very relevant in terms of output, which gives important and sufficient food to feed the population, and has an impact in terms of added value for the contribution to the GDP, and also contributes to improve employment rates in agriculture with better remuneration for farmers. You may know, and maybe it's the same here, but in Europe, agriculture is not a profession where the younger generation are going to invest in terms of training, in terms of studies, in terms of exploitation of the land available. So it's crucially important that farming as a job becomes a profession, becomes something that can give a livelihood in terms of long-term investment for new generation of farmers. The annual yield growth is also very important to attribute to the improved new varieties that have been brought to the market continuously through new protected varieties. I have to say that notwithstanding the fact that we have an effective system, as we said earlier in replying to the question from the public, from the audience, it's a choice of the breeder to protect or not protect a variety, is not compulsory. So the breeder has the sovereignty, let's say, the power to decide if he or she want to protect a variety with intellectual property rights. And the percentage of protected varieties, when we look at statistics, depending on the crops and the species, is not in the EU so high. It means that many varieties are marketed without a protection, and also many varieties do not last the whole duration of the protection. Many varieties are then not renewed in terms of plant breeders' right, and new varieties are protected and marketed, because there is a continuous necessity of new varieties with new characteristics. For instance, in vegetables, we always need new varieties with new resistances to pests and diseases, such as in tomato and lettuce. So anytime the UPOF guidelines, the technical protocols that we develop on the basis of the UPOF guidelines that are discussed at technical level in the UP of technical working parties, anytime that there is an update of the technical protocol with new resistances, for instance, in tomato, we observe immediately a rise of application. So the breeders, they already know that they have to work and look for new resistances to new diseases which are important then for the marketing of the seeds of that species. So with the harmonization work that Yolanda was mentioning earlier before, in terms of harmonization also of the technical issues behind technical protocols, we are able to bring to market new improved variety that can respond to the necessity of growers and farmers. What was mentioned before in terms of sustainability is also the necessity of making agricultural practices sustainable. What does it mean? It means bringing to the market varieties that are resistant and reduce the use of input. You may have noticed this morning a reference to success story by our representative from the EU delegation in Bangkok. And indeed, we made quite some effort in making contact with breeders in our community in the EU and getting success stories that you can read in our website. It's very enlightening and very useful. The example that was given on the grapevine varieties, not only for wine production, but also table grape varieties, is very emblematic for two reasons. The example that was given is a public institute, is not a private company in a region of Spain, which is classified as a dry region, semi-desertic region, is in the Murcia area, rather in the south of Spain, is becoming more and more desertic and dry, so without water. And the importance of plant breeding and also of protecting the varieties with plant variety right is to bring to market new varieties that can preserve the tradition also of the local communities to produce wine, but they cannot do it any longer with traditional varieties because they don't have the characteristics that are imposed by the new climatic condition. So this is also very relevant in terms of reducing the input. You may know that wine production is a sector which is the most exposed to the use of pesticide, to the use of fertilizers and inputs in general. And bringing to market varieties that can resist and can adapt to different climatic conditions is key to maintain also the tradition of wine production in Europe, in different regions of Europe, which is very, very important for our context. So yield increase was also very much due to the bringing to the market of new improved varieties. As you can see, the table on the slide through the different crops, and I was pleased to hear from Yolanda the example of strawberry and the development of the strawberry breeding program that nowadays, based on these good cultivars that came from California, UC Davis, Spain developed local breeding activities, local breeding programs. And I can also bring you another example, which is also based on the UC Davis strawberry. So once again, without the breeder exemption of the UPOF convention, that would not have been possible. That would not have been possible. And it's the breeding programs that developed in Italy, in the south of Italy, where due to climatic change, we are going to need more and more rustic varieties. Rustic varieties that can grow well under controlled condition, but also in open field, not only in greenhouses, under plastic, for instance, which is a very important requirement for sustainability. Now, another important element that we analyzed was the geographical origin of the breeders. As you can imagine, we in the EU, we have kind of major countries where there is the most of the investment in plant breeding. Country number one is the Netherlands. All over, it's the most important country where plant breeding take place, followed by France and Germany in second and third position every year. And outside of the EU, other major country where there is developed breeding activities, mostly in the private sector investment, US, Switzerland, because of the seat of major multinational companies, Denmark, UK, since it went out of the EU. Another very important indicator that we were very, in a way, also surprised to acknowledge by our study is the fact that the size of the breeders that choose to protect their innovation with plant breeders' right is mainly small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. And this is very, very important to underline and to stress, because one of the misconceptions and one of the arguments used against intellectual property on plant innovation is that the system serves only the interest of bigger multinational companies. And this is absolutely false. I mean, this is a fake news. I can witness through the data of our registry, the majority, as you can see, of the holder of the rights are SMEs that we classify according to our metrics in the EU. And 60% of the plant variety rights granted are owned by SMEs. And in total, they each own around, on average, 10 plant variety rights for each company. So this is a very important element for us to reflect on the distribution and on the fact that these companies, mainly family-run business, with the founder and now the new generation. They're very specialized. They're very specialized in their own crops. I visited several of these companies all over Europe, in the Netherlands, and most recently I went to Portugal, where I was very surprised, and you can read the success story in our website, by a joint venture between an Irish company and the Portugal one in several fields, but especially in the sweet potato sector. Sweet potato has having a huge increase in breeding in the EU, also because of the healthy properties of sweet potato. We are eating more and more and educating also the consumers to eat sweet potato because we didn't. And it's rather new as a crop. I'd like to read you loud the declaration of the owner of this SME. It's a small owned company. And he declared the following: without the protection provided by the CPVO, so our agency, as a very small company, we wouldn't be able to safeguard our work when releasing improved varieties. This protection is crucial as it allows us to monetize our unique market positions to some degree, ensuring that our innovations are not easily replicated by larger companies, larger competitors. Plant variety rights are central to our value chain and business model, offering hope of monetizing open varieties and providing protection against copycats. Without plant variety rights, investments in breeding and production optimization would be at risk. The same companies now running the 8-year effort to establish a European variety base for wasabi, which is a huge investment for the company. So you clearly understand that for a small breeder, for a small breeding company, the plant variety rights system is a tool to stay on the market, they would not be able to compete with larger corporations if they had no way of protecting their innovation and their investment. The contribution to employment via protected varieties that can make higher yield and better security because of what was mentioned before by the Thai Seed Association representative, importance of providing good quality seed that can give vigor, that can guarantee stability also in the yielding of the variety. This is essential for a farmer to have. So the employment is positively impacted by the figures in terms of protected varieties, as you can see in the green line for arable crops, for instance. And the employment has also benefited from the investment. There are many sectors that are impacted by this. It was already mentioned earlier, the intense R&D, research and development, research and innovation activities, which are not only private investment, but also public and public-private partnership investment. Very important, this aspect, to underline the participation of public institutions, public research, public laboratories, and public universities. Also there, we have a lot of examples in the different member states in the EU, where nowadays, in order to fund further research, the universities, they protect their varieties and they partner with the private sector in order to license the varieties and in order to make the best deal out of it, because the University Research Center, they don't want to deal with marketing. They are not expert in that, in trading. So the joint venture with the private sector can provide a lot of benefits to the university that can retain a part of the percentage of the royalties to continue paying for innovation. The second part was on environment. What was the impact that the system had on environment? And as we know all, due to climate change, there is a huge problem in Europe, but not only, of resources and use of water, for instance, which is an essential element. Without water, we cannot do anything. We cannot grow anything. So it's more and more crucially important that we have variety that are tolerant to drought and high temperature. And Europe, especially Spain, but not only, and also Italy and France, we are severely affected by water stress and lack of resources to grow our varieties. So the need for resilient varieties is indeed one of the priority to mitigate the impact that climate change is having in agriculture in our regions. And more we are also already now seeing that the landscape of agriculture and horticulture in Europe is changing. More and more we are capable of growing tropical fruits, for instance, in our region, whereby in the past we were not familiar with, for instance, avocado or tropical fruits in, for instance, in the south of Spain, where we are even capable of testing, of making DOS testing of these tropical fruits because of the climate that now we have, which is not any longer a Mediterranean climate, is more like to a tropical Asian climate condition that we are experiencing in Europe right now. So the Commission Green Deal is our framework for this exercise, where we want to transition to a more sustainable and agriculture with limited impact on the resources and the environment. And what we were analyzing and what was underlined very well by Yolanda before me is that plant variety rights is certainly not capable to provide all the solution, but is part of the solution of the many problems and the many challenges. And the reference to the Sustainable Development Goal, which was done before by Yolanda, is again one of the, let's imagine that this is the framework under which we move and we try to produce innovation that can provide the part of the answer to the problem to solve it. Again, I will not repeat what was very well exposed by Yolanda by referencing to the key SDG that we believe are also addressed by an effective PVR system that can contribute, can provide some solution to the problem. And what we found, because this, I can tell you, this was the most difficult part of the study in terms of methodology, how to reach kind of conclusion in terms of impact on the environment. And it was not easy for our economists and our agriculture experts. And nevertheless, the conclusion was rather optimistic and very good in terms of reduction of annual greenhouse gas emission for agriculture. Also, when we were thinking, okay, what is the impact on water use? We came to a figure that is, if you can visualize what does it mean, the figures that you have on the slide with 1/3 of Lake Constance. Lake Constance is a lake in Germany. So in order to help us visualizing, okay, what does it mean in practice, you can imagine a big quantity of water by visualizing a lake. And also the safe in terms of land that we would need to use to invest in agriculture for production purposes is lower due to better varieties that need, in fact, less land than if we would not have those. And also there, in order to try to figure out, okay, what does it mean in practice, because we speak in abstract here, it's the size of Ireland territory, which was very enlightening for us to give a kind of a visual impact. Some key findings for our exercise of making this test study in a way. We could see that farmers and growers across the EU in general have a clear benefit from innovations where even they, and I can tell you that there is acceptance of innovation when there is understanding of the added value. So you know that you pay for something which is valuable, that can give you back security. So a farmer is willing to pay for a good variety that is adapted to his or her own condition. And that's also why, linking to what was said by the Thai Seed Association representative, it's important also to have a large portfolio of breeders. We need breeders of all kind and all dimension, capable of investing knowledge in different crops. We cannot afford losing innovation in the different plant species. For this reason, R&D, research and development by breeders, is crucial, important to innovation, to employment and economic growth. And as I said before, a crucial, important role is exercised by small, medium-sized enterprises, individual breeders, research institutes. These companies are, for the European Union, the real added value that we want to preserve and we want to push forward for our future. Plant variety can support indeed sustainability agricultural practice with low input, with resistant varieties that can do their job without input or with less input. They can secure higher yields, but also adapt to biotic and abiotic stresses more and more, for which we need to develop varieties that can work under extreme climate conditions without water, with drought, and with less land. The legislation must serve the process, do not have to be an obstacle for innovation. Legislation has to drive innovation, has to enable innovation. Legislation cannot and should not be a blocking point. We have seen in the presentation in your current legislation, where we saw a mixture of concepts in the law, from an old PVP model with CBT, access to genetic resources principles. But these issues can be combined and can be compatible each other, as was said by Yolanda. So we need the legislation that is an enabler, that make possible inclusive food system. And we are in the pipeline also always to revise our legislation. Possibly there will be a revision of our PVP legislation. As I said, we are aging, 30 years now. It's time to look into it and see whether we can improve. We are also looking into the new regulations on marketing of varieties, the so-called plant reproductive material on marketing of agriculture and vegetable and fruit varieties. And finally, there is the huge debate on gene editing and new genomic technique regulation, which is right now under the legislative process with the European Parliament, the member states and the European Council, to try to get a final regulatory framework in the European Union enabling the use of new genomic techniques. As I heard, it is possible in Thailand, so there could be no innovation without a clear regulatory framework, which for us would be based on the UPOF Convention. Thank you very much.